This is hashtag Gen Z, a podcast that explores Generation Z, who they are, how they're different from other generations, while also being an incredible blend of those who came before them. We explore what they think is cool, what moves them, and why they do what they do. I'm your host, Meghan Grace. Well, friends, welcome back. It is season 8. I am not sure how, but here we are. We're going to kick off this season just the way we love to, with someone who's basically become part of the show's DNA, and not Waffles, even though she's always here behind the scenes helping us record. But we're really going to talk about what's going on with Gen Z right now. And if we're going to do that, we need to bring in someone who's equal parts research brain and lived life experience. This episode is all about love, dating, and relationships. And not in this way of here's 3 tips in an infographic on Canva kind of way. We're talking about what's underneath it all. And when we think about Gen Z growing up and developing these relationships. So we're going to talk about why so many Gen Z are delaying dating, why rejection, ghosting, and making the wrong choice can feel so high stakes, and why so many people, especially young adults, are craving connection while also protecting their peace. And the research is backing this up. That this isn't just a vibe that's going on. We've seen major shifts in how young people form relationships compared to older generations, including less teen dating overall. And at the same time, public health leaders have been sounding the alarm on loneliness and social isolation, not as a personality issue, but as a real health issue. So if you're feeling like modern dating is kind of a lot, you're not really imagining that. And today's guest is the perfect person to help us unpack all of that with me. Dr. Corey Seemiller is an award-winning professor of leadership, a global generational expert, and someone you all know well if you've been with us for a while. I'm lucky to call Corey my research partner, but when she's not spending time solely focusing on generations, she does a lot of work in organizations and how relationships can really impact the way we work and connect with others. Corey's also a new author of her memoir, The Soulmate Strategy, My Imperfect Plan to Conquer Heartbreak and Find True Love, which is personal, funny, honest, and rooted in what happens when you're rebuilding after heartbreak and trying to date in a world that's changed. I've been lucky enough to be around Corey as she's been writing this book over the last few years, and I'm so excited for us to be able to talk about that, along with the different things that are going on with Gen Z when they're trying to find love themselves. In this conversation, Corey brings us an inside the new relationship data she's collected, and we pull out the Gen Z storylines you'll absolutely recognize. This idea of independence, safety, confidence, companionship, and the very real pressure to not mess it up. So whether you're Gen Z, raising Gen Z, loving Gen Z, mentoring Gen Z, or just trying to understand why dating feels like a group project with no rubric, we've got you. Okay, season 8 is starting now. Let's get into it. Starting the season how we like to. I think there's only been one time when a season didn't start with Corey, and it was my biggest regret. But Corey's back to help us kick off season 8, which is really weird that this is our 8th year doing this, and the 8th year that Corey and I are hanging out just chatting about generations again. And really exciting one. I think every year we come back with a new project, even though we say that each year we're going to chill out, and then we never do. But this year's, I think, a little bit different. And before we get into some of the fun stuff we've been working on, give the listeners any big life updates or exciting projects you've been working on that we might want to share with listeners, or anything to give them a big update on your life at all. Not to lead them into anything, but just give the people what they might need.
Well, yeah, it's so fun to be back, and I regret the season that I missed. Maybe we have to go back in time and re-record an episode and just slide it right into that season.
Yeah, this was actually the real first one. Sorry.
This is what's cool about this conversation we're going to have today about love and relationships, is kind of the intersection of things that have been happening in my world with my interest and pursuit of understanding love and relationships, and a memoir that I wrote called The Soulmate Strategy, My Imperfect Plan to Conquer Heartbreak and Find True Love. That memoir is taking up a lot of my time. It's exciting, a lot of promotion and a lot of book signings, book events, which has been really, really fun. And it's all about getting through a pretty hard breakup and back out into the dating world and relationship world. And even since I hadn't been in it in a few years, a lot had changed. So that was my attempt at chronicling my journey, putting it out there for folks in my own book, and then stemming from that into the work that you and I are doing with generations in terms of love and relationships.
I think it's so interesting because I've known you for a long time. And so I've been, a part of your life, and, your relationships, you manage them. And I think that you've gone through relationship transitions in our work, and then you will give me an update and be like, when did that happen? You're like, months ago. And I was like, what? And so it's weird, but amazing to see you kind of putting out something new into the world, something that's so personal. And I'm sure it's going to be very well received. And I know you've gotten really good feedback from people that have read it so far. I can't wait to personally read it because I feel like I've been along with the journey as a cheerleader and a friend, but I didn't have to write anything for this one. So I'm extra excited about this one. And you did us a solid because when Corey gets interested in something, it's not just like, that's interesting. It's like, let me go full blown into exploration. I know there's a personal element to you going through relationship shifts and exploring new things in your life, but what drew you to wanting to study relationships beyond the fact that like you were trying to sort one out yourself?
Yeah, part of what happened is after my breakup is I went through this 1-year-long healing journey and tried all these different things to feel better and move on with my life. And one of the things I actually did was launch a podcast with a friend of mine. It's called Rock That Relationship. And it's all about talking about heartbreak and dating and relationships and sort of tips and tricks. And this sort of worked really well in some senses because I'm a professor of leadership. I teach a lot of things on interpersonal dynamics, emotional intelligence. So, from a clinical perspective, I had a lot of good information to share. But it was mostly this kind of heartbreak perspective that I could come and share on that podcast. But as I've now done 12 seasons of this, it's like, keep going. I want more data because my personal experiences are awesome and they do create a sense of connection and validation for people. I'm a researcher at heart, so I love understanding what people's perceptions are around love and relationships, and I just simply didn't have that information. And as well as I do that when I get a research question or you get a research question, boom, we're off and running, and we usually have some kind of big cool study, and this is nothing short of that.
I'm so thankful you did that because I'm just lucking out on your really good work ethic, but then also your just innate desire to be curious about something that you collected all this data about relationships from all these wonderful people that were interested. And then you did us a solid by including a generations question. Did you plan to do that? Or was it like, oh, by the way, let's add that in there and see what we can do with it? Because I'm thankful you did.
Well, initially, the whole point was to just get general data because I'm in the process of writing another book about heartbreak to healing and strategies people can use to move through it. And I thought I should really get some actual data for that book. And so originally I was doing that. And I thought, wait a minute, this is very much in alignment with the generational work that we do because someone who's in their 60s or 70s who's going through what we call a gray divorce, where they might not want to repartner, or if they're a man, they do statistically want to repartner and a woman does not typically. And so what kinds of advice and thoughts would I give to them that would be different than maybe someone who's 23 years old entering into their first relationship? And it's different stuff. So I thought, let's throw that question in, of course, and we can do some magic with it.
And magic we have done because, I mean, you've granted me access to be able to look at the data. And of course, it's a great study. It's so robust. There's so many different data points. I feel like we could probably 4 different episodes just talking about some of the stuff that we're finding and just looking at generational stuff. And us being us, we pulled out Gen Z. And that's really where we want to talk a lot about today and some of the interesting things. And before listeners like, where can I get that data? It's not published anywhere yet. Maybe one day, maybe soon, but this was just kind of something that came up and it was a happy accident that Corey threw that in there. And now we're going to see where it takes us. It's been really interesting to get into that data. I'm really thankful you added that generational question in because there have already been some really fascinating things. And this being a podcast about Gen Z, I feel like we got to do it right and we got to talk about Gen Z on this one. So, from some of the stuff that you've done already, what's the Gen Z dating landscape looking like? And what are we seeing with this generation right now? I know I've seen some stuff both in the data and then just anecdotally and observationally.
So there's a lot of themes that we're picking up from the data, but also, like you're saying, in real life. I mean, one of the things we know about them is that a lot of them are not dating at all. It was kind of a rite of passage if you look back at, I'm a Gen Xer and thinking about when was my first date. And it was definitely, actually, my first date was in 5th grade. It was with this guy, Scott. He and I went to the roller rink together. I mean, it was a whole group went to the roller rink, but he went and sat on the bus next to me because he was in the middle of a breakup with his girlfriend and they broke up for a week and I got a roller skating date in and then they got back together. So, but that was 5th grade. I mean, kids in 5th grade are not dating like this. Kids in high school aren't even dating. So it's interesting to think about that movement. Is this more intentional focus on dating? And if they are dating, a lot of them are doing it in groups. They're going to dances with a bunch of people. And then one of them might be their date. There's a lot more young people that are identifying as pansexual. So they might be dating across gender. One of the things that I think is also fascinating to keep an eye on is the notion of the trad wife movement and the manosphere, and this idea of these gendered approaches to harkening back to the 1950s. And so we're seeing, while some Gen Zers are waiting a long time to maybe date and get married and have children, others are jumping right into it at a very early age because they're embracing this movement of the 1950s, sort of leave it to beaver. The woman's home and is a domestic caretaker while the husband goes off to work. And while that's not a prominent theme, it is a trend that is out there in terms of the dating and romance world.
Yeah, I think that this idea of delaying dating is something that, and maybe not even dating, but like relationships and romance and the intimacy that comes with it. I look at it from what I see in the college space is a lot of people are going into college not having really had any dating experience, and they're getting there and they have just oftentimes a very heightened co-ed experience where they can date and hang out and hook up and do whatever they want, and the norms around some of that has been a little bit difficult. And I hear that from kind of like health and safety educators that people are delaying dating. And so they're delaying those interactions a little bit more and coming in. And once they do have that space, there's some tension points there. What I found interesting in our data is that half have been in love, which I do love that they're saying, like Gen Zers are predominantly like, and this is across the board, they've been in love, but fewer than half have had their heart broken. Maybe some of them are avoiding dating because they don't want to have their heart broken, which is, I think, a fair concern for them to have. And just some other interesting things we found, there are more young men, at least in the study and in the data we collected, there were more young men that were like single as a Pringle, like 2/3 were single, but less than half of young women of Gen Z were single. So like there is this drift, I think. And I'm like, okay, who are the young Gen Z women dating if they're not dating Gen Z men, or are they dating younger? No, probably not. So they're probably dating people of a different generation. And so I think there's going to be an interesting clash as we move into more Gen Z approaching marriage. And they're getting there because they're 30. They're turning 31 this year. Some of them are.
One of the things
Correct.
that I thought was interesting is when we asked about dating fears, like, why don't
Oh,
you
yeah.
wanna date? And we look across all the generations, and we found that basically something that is universal to every generation when we talk about our working generations, which are baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zers, is we see that the number one reason that people in many cases, or at least at the top, is being rejected, dumped, or ghosted. And so that's what you're talking about, is like getting your heart broken. That's why they're not dating. The other one that is really interesting, and this cuts across all generations too, is the making the wrong choice. Like, what if I pick someone, I invest in them, and then that was like a bad idea and I have to start over? What's fascinating is that the third one, or in the top three, was the same for baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials, which was, I'm afraid to start over. That's why I don't want to date again. I just don't want to start again, because many of them are older and they've gotten out of a relationship or been divorced. But for Gen Zers, they're in their top three is feeling that they aren't good enough. And that was 51% said that they are scared of dating because they feel they aren't good enough. To give you some perspective, only 16% of baby boomers said that, 27% of Gen Xers, and 28% of millennials. That's 51% of Gen Zers say they feel they aren't good enough for maybe being in a relationship.
I think that part of that is one, they live in a hyper comparison environment. So their identity development and their identity expression has just, I think, really been heightened in the digital world. And so I could see how there could be more of a pressure for young people today feeling like they're not good enough to be in a relationship. But I think there's also a bit of that feeling can come from as you're navigating your late teens and your 20s and you're approaching your 30s. You just wake up in your 30s and you're like, I really don't care. I'm great. And you stop caring what other people think. I think a lot more in your 30s, at least I did. I'm like, whatever. You're going to love me or you're going to hate me. And that's fine. And I think that changes a lot as we get a little bit older. So maybe it's a little bit age, but some of it could also be the context of relationships just having a huge microscope over them with all the social media and technology we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense, because in our other studies, we continue to find things around, even they're not necessarily wanting to raise their hand in class and participate or lead a group because they're afraid that they're not good enough or that they're going to be judged by others. So this isn't something that's really isolated. We've seen this come up in various
Mhm.
studies we've done, and all over the place, is this kind of feeling of self-doubt or lack of confidence. And so it's not surprising, But it's something to be aware of when we look at this generation is that they don't feel like they're good enough. So they might not be asking someone out on a date, or they might not be willingly getting into a relationship and say, hey, I'm just going to ride this one out. And if everybody's riding it out, no one's asking anyone to go on a date, then by virtue of that, they're not even dating.
Right. If everyone's scared of it, then no one's asking anybody out, then no one's practicing the important part of dating. And I do think that it shouldn't be a one and done thing. I think that there is something to be said about growing through romances that just don't work out, like on all ends. And there's so much to learn from that, and a part of adulthood. I mean, I hope they get out there and they do talk. And I think that with what we explored in the podcast last year of this idea of intentional gathering, intentional growing up, I do hope that with Gen Z's kind of desire to do more of that, it will spur into how they're engaging in romantic relationships. That's just me, my hopeful optimism, though.
I mean, I think it all goes back to this idea of this fear of failure. Is there's a lot more at stake for Gen Z, particularly young Gen Zers, than there was for other generations. Financially, you can't make a wrong turn because they're living on the brink of a collapsing economy for lower wage or entry level workers, which we didn't necessarily face the same way. They are going to college and can't afford to be undecided because it costs time and money to do that. So there's a fear of making kind of a mistake, which is why that fear of the wrong choice is still part of, for them. They had 52% said they were afraid of making the wrong choice. So some people in that case just don't make a choice at all, and they just sit still. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing until Gen Zers, some of them feel more assured about what decision they're making. They might just sit there and wait.
Yeah. I think that the delaying it, and I think they're intentionally delaying. I don't think it's like they're out partying and won't settle down, because we've seen across the board that like how they're socializing in general is less about like, let's go, sow our wild oats. I think there's always going to be those people in every generation, but I think predominantly we're not seeing, they're like, I don't want to settle down and get married and live a boring life. I think they're just being very intentional, and that delay could have different impacts for how they're thinking about other aspects of their adulthood. And I think that while we're on the topic of settling down, as we said earlier, I'm not saying that there's a certain age you're allowed to be married, but many of them are approaching that phase in life. Marriage might be on their brain. In this study that we did, we're seeing about roughly like 9 to 10% are identifying as married or are currently married, which I think is on trend, is on par. I think that what we've read from outside sources is that this generation is going to continue a similar trend to millennials of getting married and kind of partnering later in life more formally, and starting families later in life if they're going to do that. But I think that marriage is still on the mind. And I think that we talked about there's kind of this growing divide between, and it's not just about men and women and the divide between men and women in Gen Z, but maybe some differing perspectives on marriage that we're seeing within the single generation of what they want out of marriage. So I know we had an interesting question, but maybe let's turn to why Gen Z might be interested in getting married, and then what are some of their motivations for potentially avoiding it or not wanting to get married? What were some of the things that stuck out for you?
Well, something that stuck out for me are some of the universal reasons why people would want to get married. Number one being love, number two being companionship, and number three is to have children or to have a family. That seems to be pretty consistent, over time as to the reasons why people want to get married. But I thought was really interesting, though, is when we looked at it by gender. For men, one of the reasons they said that they wanted to get married was to not be alone. 23% of them said to not be alone, whereas women, only 13% said to not be alone. So you're seeing this sort of rise in a desire for independence. And so this idea of like, okay, I'm not getting married because, I'm afraid of being by myself. Maybe I want companionship. That's one thing, but I'm not afraid of being by myself, which is kind of creating a really different kind of an atmosphere when it comes to this discrepancy in terms of not being alone.
Mm-hmm. We see that conversely on the why would you not be interested in getting married? Young women in Gen Z were saying that one of their top reasons for or concerns for getting married was losing their independence. I think that we're seeing that young women in Gen Z are just not worried about having a full social life, whether they have a partner or not, whether they're in a long-term legally binding committed relationship or not. They're not worried about being alone, and they're not worried about not having companionship. They don't want to risk companionship over their independence. And I think that's like a really interesting tug
Mhm.
between, again, if we're looking at just heterosexual relationships, that's going to be difficult. I think that we can see that across different sexual orientations and how people are structuring their relationships. There's a divide there. If people, their young women do not want to lose their independence. which
Right.
good for
Right.
them,
Well,
I guess.
and the other thing with that too is when you look at it, we're combining finances. I thought this was fascinating.
Mhm.
24% of women said that they don't want to get married because they don't want to combine finances, whereas only 17% of men actually said that. Again, all of
Mhm.
these measures, we continue to look at them in different questions across different metrics, and they're showing this idea of this independent woman, which is why I go back to that original thought about what are some themes, is looking at this push for kind of trad wife and this idea of the woman giving up her independence, staying home and being financially reliant on some husband to come home and take care of them, which flies in the face of most Gen Zers and their views on women and their views on love, relationships, and marriage.
I listened to a really great episode from NPR about the trad wife movement and how it's kind of like changing, but we're seeing it so prominently because there's a few very large voices and influencers in that space that are glamorizing that lifestyle. But largely, it's just that maybe women do just want some of these slower pace activities in their life of like making a nice loaf of bread and like enjoying an afternoon to sew things or craft or an expressive art outlet or like the art of slowing down in general. Less so, I want to give up my financial freedom and my independence in a true trad wife sense. I think if we were to look at it, like there's probably fewer people that actually want to do the trad wife movement as much as they're glamorizing the slowness of that life, which sounds lovely, compared to I think there's actually probably more men in the manosphere. I don't have the hard numbers on it, but it's just a hunch that I have that the manosphere feels a little bit more mysterious and a little bit more underground, but still above ground. That there's going to be this tug of cohort of people that are going to be seeing how they partner and couple their lives with others very differently.
Absolutely. Other than the women who do buy into sort of the trad wife movement, a lot of women are not really wanting to date men that have this view. And so you see
Yeah.
some single men that are very male patriarchy focused, and the Gen Z women are like, yeah, no, thank you, and are walking away from that. And so it's interesting because when we look at something like the trad wife movement, you see that we're not in an economy in which most people can actually have one household income. Like you just can't. I mean, back in the 80s, we couldn't even do it, which is why women started increasing their employment. And so we're certainly not going to have that in this day and age. And so what's ending up happening is that it's basically saying, women, slow down, bake your bread and sew your stuff. But also, you probably can't afford to live off of your husband's salary. So go get a job too. And then it validates this idea of this woman playing two formal roles, which we know that have been played for eons. But there are a lot of Gen Z women who are seeing through it. I mean, I read an article yesterday all about how many Gen Zers are saying, okay, so you're an influencer that promotes the trad wife stuff, and you say we should stay at home and be reliant on our husband for income, but you make millions of dollars selling your videos on YouTube. So you're an entrepreneur and you're basically capitalizing off of this. So there's a little bit of a transparency where some of them are seeing through this movement and really don't want to participate in it. Now, there are some women who do, and this is kind of an interesting trend, but also do think that it's competing values for women and to Gen Z women today.
I think that Gen Z, their relationship with technology and their relationship with social media and what's going on and like large voices on social media and in media in general has always been so nuanced. So it's like, yes, they might be like, yes, slowing down and baking bread sounds amazing, but you're correct. You're a millionaire. You don't have to rely on your husband. I think your husband's actually probably relying a little bit more on you. Ironically, I accidentally got into watching Secret Lives of Mormon Wives with one of my best friends. And like the shift between season 1 and season 2 of the dynamics between men and women, especially in the LDS church, was like these women were like, they're bringing in millions of dollars and their husbands are like, but I have a job. And they're like, sure you do, honey. And it's these women that are
Right.
making a ton of money online in a relatively, I mean, the LDS church has been very pretty clear of like, this is how families are structured. These are the roles of the family. And so I think Gen Z does look through it and they say, yes, this is one lifestyle, but at the same time, I can see through the veil of social media. Similarly, the way that they looked at like the millennial girl boss movement of like, you can have it all, you can do everything, you can be burnt out at your job and have a family and be in charge of all of that. Gen Z saw through the girl boss movement and was like, I don't know about that. And so I think that they're charting their own course as they always do of maybe it is a slower life outside of work, but still feeling very driven and very motivated in the work that they do while also not giving up their own independence. I guess we'll see.
I guess we'll see.
Young men still trying to figure you out day by day. But I do think the thing that For young men in Gen Z, it's a matter of getting out there and actually spending the time with people and interacting and doing that interaction, because the women are not so worried about being alone and they're not so worried about having companionship. But that does seem to be a fear for young men in this generation. I keep hearing of like the loneliness epidemic of young men. And I was like, they need to go hang out with each other. Like that's the only thing that I can provide is they need to intentionally socialize with one another. And I think that that might help.
Well, yeah, and what's funny is when we look at the data and we say, what are the 3 reasons for getting married, the top 3 reasons between Gen Z women and men, it's the same: love, companionship, and having children. But if you look
Mhm.
at it, for women, it's love and having children that are higher than men. And for men, it's companionship that is higher than love and having children. Companionship for men is 62%. For women, it's 54%. It's this
Mhm.
idea that I don't want to be alone. I want to have someone to depend on. And as we talk about things like gray divorces, this is not a new phenomenon just for Gen Z. Seeing it where
Mm-mm.
as men and women age and they get divorced, you see men more likely to remarry in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even than women,
Mhm.
because a lot of women say, I don't want to take care of anyone else. I just want to focus on me. And men say, hey, great. I want to meet somebody and, maybe for companionship. And some people, maybe it's because they don't even know how to do their laundry. I have no idea. But it's definitely, we're seeing this sort of independence thread cutting across all generations. It's just showing up really differently in this era.
Absolutely. And I think it's you look at anyone that does marriage and family stuff, they will say like as you get to a certain phase of women it's not that they've never needed the companionship of marriage, right? Like having a forever roommate's pretty cool, but women are also really good at retaining their social groups throughout their lives. And so they will always find a person to be, and whereas like men's social groups tend to shrink as they get older. And so then it is that companionship piece where women are like, I don't need like just human connection. That's something I don't necessarily need in my relationship. And then it's the only source of companionship for men. So I just think that it is fascinating, like the socialization of the things that have occurred over time and the norms. I do hope that Gen Z sees that and kind of like maybe bucks the trend a little bit earlier, and that the young men do retain their social groups because we know that's so important. And I do think that that will shift as we're seeing Gen Z become parents and potentially model some of the things that millennials have modeled of men being much more present fathers in their children's lives and spending more time on average with their children. Maybe we'll see more dads groups pop up, and that's where Gen Z men are going to retain their relationships. But I think that there's something really critically important about having those social connections and the intentionality. And like, we can't force young men to be like, go hang out with each other. But if there are listening, it's kind of like maintain your friendships throughout the phases of life because you will need them. You don't want them to drift away.
And also for young men, you're far more attractive to young Gen Z women, likely, if you believe in their rights. We continue to find that kind of data as well. And there's a lot of young Gen Z men that are really kind of progressive minded in terms of supporting in their rights. I don't think you're having a hard time probably getting some dates. And that's one of the things that Gen Z women have been concerned about is
Mhm.
finding men that will support their rights, their views, their experiences. And I don't want to make it sound like there aren't Gen Z men out there doing that, because there are a lot. And you all are a pretty hot commodity, is what I'd have to say.
Yeah, I saw this on social media. This guy was like, "Oh, you wanna know about my politics?" And then he did, like, a funny take on it of all the people that influence his politics, and it was, like, Mr. Rogers and, like, really, people that we would be like, "Ooh, that's an intellectually sexy man." But the women, if he was trying to attract straight women, it was just, like, comments of, like, "This is the hottest post I've ever seen," of someone
Exactly.
that is just, like, about human rights. And that's not even, like, it doesn't have to be anything, like, super political, just, like, do you care about other people? Because something we did see was that young women are a little bit more concerned, and our non-binary friends that were participating in this survey, they were concerned about safety in their relationships. And like, it's going to be hard to be in a relationship with someone if safety, psychological, physical, emotional, is not there. Young people today are learning that concept a lot earlier of like, what is psychological safety in a relationship, and making that a forefront of like, if I can't feel emotionally safe with you or physically safe with you, I don't need to date you. I think no matter how you partner, no matter how you date, being intentional about the safety and the rights of the people that you're dating is really important. But yes, young men, if you're listening, supporting the rights of the people that you want to be dating, probably a good move in making yourself look attractive.
Exactly.
Just full stop. I know that you have spent a ton of time, and really this is just tip of the iceberg with the data that we've collected. Well, that you've collected and I'm analyzing. Let's call it what it is. We've got really initial findings about where some perspectives on love are and dating and marriage, but you also have spent a lot of time navigating love and happiness in relationships after a hard breakup. And you wrote a memoir, which we want to make sure people go pick up and read. So I'm sure you've learned some lessons that we can give to listeners. We do have Gen Zers that tune in who might be like, yes, Corey, please tell me how to fix my love life. But we also probably have listeners who have Gen Zers in their own life, whether they're raising them or mentoring them or their boss. So, what are some things that you have learned in your journey around this that maybe listeners of the Gen Z variety might be able to take with them into their adventures in love?
Yeah, I'm going to give you three kind of general tips. They're universal for pretty much everyone. But then I'm going to give you one that's going to be specific to not Gen Z. Does that make sense? So let me give you the first three. And this is dating, right? Like if you want to create a relationship, the very first thing to do, and this is sometimes easier for people who are older, who have done a lot of self work and are a little bit have more self understanding of who they are, but it's be very intentional about what you want, right? If you're afraid that you're going to pick the wrong person or you're afraid you might lose your independence, this is a big decision. Know who you are and know what you want and whatever that looks like. So if you know that you want to live in Los Angeles for the rest of your life, then don't date somebody who lives in Tampa, Florida, who isn't willing to move. It's even something as simple as that. Know what you want. But know about yourself, like know whether or not you want to have kids, know what kind of religion you might want to practice, if any, or spirituality. Is understanding yourself and knowing exactly what you're looking for will help you narrow down to people that are more viable options for you rather than just the one person who might ask you out or that you seem interested in. So that's the first thing is be intentional about what you want. The second is put yourself out there. And I think, Megan, you talked about this, particularly with Gen Z men, is this idea of being social, meeting people in groups or, our dating question, we found that most Gen Zers and actually most people in general really like being able to meet somebody to date through somebody that they know, getting fixed up by a friend, being introduced by a parent or family member. Somehow somebody knows them and has vetted them. So when you get asked to go to do certain social events or you're invited somewhere, go. You may end up meeting somebody through that particular venue or that activity. So go. And then also put yourself out there in other ways. I know for a lot of generations, actually, online dating did not score very high. Using a professional matchmaker did not score very high. And participating in speed dating did not score very high. And so some of those more kind of contrived ways to meet people might be less successful, but they also can be successful. So try those. Even if you say that you don't want to do them, try them out anyways, but put yourself out there. And then the third thing I would say is wait. You are worth the wait. If you recognize that something isn't what you want or somebody isn't a good fit for you, don't just date them because you don't want to be by yourself. Don't just date them because you think you're supposed to and you're keeping up with all your friends who might be getting engaged. Wait for the person that makes you feel respected and that is kind to you and fits the needs of being intentional about what you want. So I think those three are really important generally, but really for Gen Z. The thing that I say is if you're a Gen Z and you're listening to this and you're thinking about maybe your parent got divorced, so you're trying to figure out why mom or dad isn't dating, just kind of looking around at some older folks. The three older generations actually said starting over was one of their top three fears. So maybe encouraging them to explore that a little more. Some don't want to start over, but others might think it's too late for love. Tell your mom or your grandma or your grandpa or your dad or your uncle or whoever, say, it's not too late for love. If this is something you want, go get it. And thinking that some people think it might require too much effort, right? Like I have to put myself out there. I've never done online dating. I've never done this. Well, be a support for those people who are maybe older and going through this and say, how can I help you? And support them in going through it. And some people might just decide that they don't want to put themselves out there again, and that's their choice. But I think that being able to really unpack that idea of the fear of starting over could really be useful for some of those in older generations.
If there's any generation that I know that's going to be able to sit in the emotional support of others and absorbing that, I think it's Gen Z. So I hope that they hear that and say, yeah, I'll go help my aunt that's recently unpartnered or whatever it has been. So Gen Z, go help the others. But I do love that your encouragement of like, you got to get out there and do stuff. And I don't think it's the matter of you got to get out there and do stuff and feel uncomfortable about it. But like, you can't, sadly, people are not just knocking on doors saying, is anyone available to be dated in this home? Like the idea of a suitor or a caller coming to your house is just not a thing that happens. But you got to put yourself out there. And we learned a lot last season around how Gen Z is just socializing differently, going to the spaces, the third spaces, the coffee shop, the craft night at a craft beer place or a yoga pop-up. Those places of those interest-driven gatherings can be such a great place to meet people and connect with people, and going to them because you enjoy them, not because you're trying to find like your next boyfriend, girlfriend. The idea of you got to be in the places that you want to feel good about yourself, and you're likely to find someone that also cares about things you care about. So go to that run club. I won't be at the run club because I don't have money, but like go to the run club, go on the hiking group, whatever it is, and you might find someone along the way.
I do want to add one thing that's really important to know is I just read an article the other day that said the generation most likely to survive a zombie apocalypse was hands down Generation X. So
Yeah,
for
I
all
love
you
that.
Gen Zers out there who have Gen X parents that are going through it and they might be considering getting themselves back out there, you can just tell them, listen, if you can survive a zombie apocalypse, you can put a profile on Match.com.
No one needed to write that article. I could have told you that it was Gen X.
Exactly. There's no voting that needs to take place.
Not even a vote. You're going to survive because you've lived without the internet before. Millennials will be right behind you because sometimes we take directions pretty well. So we'll happily follow you into the zombie apocalypse. Well, Corey, you know how we end every episode. We're 8 seasons into this. We're more than 10 years into studying Gen Z. So maybe this is just a concurrent look at it. But what's your current favorite thing about Gen Z?
So, I love all the deep stuff, right? About how they want to change the world and all these things, right? But I'm going to give one that's sort of a little bit less recognized. I
Okay.
love that they are nostalgic for the 80s and 90s. They're
Oh,
going
yeah.
to thrift stores, they're buying their Air Jordan used shoes, they're getting Sony Walkmans, they're watching old TV shows. I absolutely love it. It's so fun to watch them sort of bring my childhood back to life.
Yeah, they are nostalgic, and it's so interesting because I think growing up, I was like, the 70s seem interesting, right? But it wasn't like I'm going to make my whole identity about the 70s or the 50s or whatever it was that was like, people were interested in, but it's not like a full fashion trend, a full movement. So I don't know if my generation was ever nostalgic for the past. Was Gen X ever nostalgic for the past?
We were living the present and it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, you all were out, you know, I think, like, I watched Stranger Things, and I was like, "Dang, these kids in the '80s were all over the place with 0 parent supervision, no supervision." So I do think it's really cute that Gen Z is nostalgic for a time when they weren't even a twinkle in the eye of someone. They didn't even live those years.
Exactly.
All right, Corey, well, thank you again for being here. Today you came in and you were actually the love doctor on this one.
The love doctor. I like that. Pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Well, Corey, thanks for being here, and as usual, thanks for helping us learn a little bit.
Thanks, Megan.
Okay, let's pull this together because Corey gave us a lot to think about, as she always does. She is one of my favorite people to be able to think alongside with. But here are a few insights I don't want us to miss from this episode. First, Gen Z isn't avoiding love. They're just guarding themselves. And one of the biggest takeaways is that hesitation around dating isn't apathy. I think it's actually a form of protection. Across generations, people fear rejection and heartbreak, but for Gen Z specifically, over half have said that they're afraid to date because they feel like they're not good enough. And that's a confidence gap. So what do we do with that? You can build confidence by participation and not perfection. Low stakes conversations can feel like practice reps. Showing up to the event and letting yourself practice being seen is a great first step to building that confidence, to knowing that you are good enough. 2, independence is a core value. Especially for Gen Z women, the fear isn't about being alone, it's about losing independence. That this showed up as a common concern about marriage, finances, and autonomy. This generation wants partnership and not this idea that they are going to have to lose a sense of self to do that. So one clear action step is that we can really get into understanding what independence actually means to us before you commit to someone else. Define it now so you don't have to defend it later down the road. And 3, companionship can't be your only community. For some Gen Z men, companionship is ranked especially high as a motivation for marriage. That tells us something about loneliness and shrinking social circles. Romantic relationships are important, but they can't be your only source of connection. So what can you do? Maintain your friendships, join a group around your interests, go do a thing, but build community outside of just dating and your romantic relationships. 4, be intentional and not reactive. So this was Corey's advice, and it was really simple. It's knowing what you want, put yourself out there, and wait for the right fit. That middle ground can be intentional but patient is where healthy relationships can live. So this conversation wasn't really about rushing into love or opting out of it entirely. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but it is about this idea of getting really clear about what we want in life, but developing the confidence to choose connection in a way that aligns with our values. And that feels like a very Gen Z way to do things. Now, we would love to hear what you liked about this episode. What stuck out to you, and what are you going to keep thinking about as this episode ends? You can share more about it in the Spotify listener comment section, or you can rate, follow, review wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help more people find the show and engage in our conversations with us. We are about to kick off many more great conversations that we hope that you're going to love. However, we are always looking for new guests and new topics. Really, this is an opportunity for us to explore topics that you might also be interested in learning about. So feel free to hop on over to my website and you can connect with us there to share your thoughts. We're also available on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can find me at Meghan M. Grace. I could not do this without the wonderful Gen Z team behind me. And this episode was produced by Callie Waters, and she also edited it. So congratulations to Callie on your first editing credit. We're so proud of you. So thank you again for stopping by. Let's continue this conversation, and we will chat soon.